Good evening. Come on now, we can do better than that. Good evening. That's better. You know, when Eitan called me, I didn't really know what hat I was supposed to wear. I was very humbled to be here. I didn't know if I was supposed to wear my hat as city council president, so come before you as a city person. I was supposed to wear my hat as somebody who had something to do with building this place, as Jill's predecessor. I was supposed to be in my role as ADL honorary board member, or as I decided that I would come actually as somebody who has a degree in theology. I started thinking about tonight, what are we doing here? And I started thinking about that great story about Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. His daughter, Dr. Susanna Heschel, who's been to Atlanta many times, who has attended the King's service many times, I got a chance to meet her a few years ago. She tells the story that when Rabbi Heschel came home from the march from Selma to Montgomery, that he wrote, for many of us, the march from Selma to Montgomery was about protest and prayer. Legs are not lips and walking is not kneeling, and yet our legs uttered songs. Even without words, our march was worship. I felt my legs were praying. Now, when I was looking up the quote so that I got it right, what I didn't realize until I was coming here was that Frederick Douglass had said something very similar when he, in his writings, when he was working for freedom in the 19th century. Two quotes. He said, praying for freedom never did me any good till I started praying with my feet. He also said, I prayed for freedom for 20 years, but received no answer until I prayed with my legs. What we're doing here tonight is we're praying. We're praying for the hostages to be released and reunited safely with their families. We're praying for the destruction of terrorism as a threat. We're praying for each other. You came here tonight because you think there's a better world that's possible. It's a prayer of hope. And for some in this room, anti-Semitism is personal. For all of us, it is present. I want you to take a minute, and anybody who identifies primarily not as Jewish, would you raise your hand just for a minute? Just raise your hand. And I just want you to hold it up for a second. We are praying. We are praying a prayer that has been prayed before in Atlanta. I want to tell a quick story about Chris Carr. I met Chris Carr in this room for the first time when we had just opened the Center for Civil and Human Rights. Back then, he was the head of economic development for the state of Georgia. And yes, sadly, he was a Republican back then, too. And I only say that as a Democrat. But we formed a very quick bond. When he says that he's my friend, he is my friend. And we disagree on a whole host of things. A whole host of things. But Chris has always been there when the center opened to make sure that folks on both sides of the aisle saw it as a place for them. He's always been one to return a phone call when I needed help or needed advice, needed something clearly done or clearly opined on from his positions. When we opened this place, there were folks from various communities who didn't think it was going to be big enough for them to be included. There were folks from the LGBTQ communities who said, is it really going to include us? There were folks from the Jewish community that said, can you talk about human rights and still have us in it? There were folks from white communities who said, are we going to be guilty or is there a place enough for us in it? It's big enough for everybody to be in it. And we have to continue to have the faith that Atlanta can make sure that it's big enough for everybody to be in it, no matter what we believe, no matter where we come from, no matter where we are today, that we stand together believing that this community can be big enough for us all. Dr. King in the I Have a Dream speech talked about the table of brotherhood, not tables of brotherhood. One. There's only one table of brotherhood, and we are praying tonight that we will continue to foster a table of brotherhood. One more prayer that we pray from the past for the present. Some of you knew C.T. Vivian. C.T. Vivian, I called him lovingly to his face the Forrest Gump of the civil rights movement. Because C.T. showed up everywhere, just like Forrest Gump did in that movie. C.T. Vivian was a lunch counter protester. C.T. Vivian was a freedom rider. C.T. Vivian was on the bridge. In Selma, C.T. Vivian was at the I Have a Dream speech. C.T. Vivian was everywhere. He was omnipresent. And when we started building the Center for Civil and Human Rights, the first time I met him, he said, I want to tell you something. I'd never met him. I knew who he was. He said, I want to tell you something. He said, if anybody ever gives you any grief, that you're young and white and that you're helping build this center, you send them to me. He said, because we weren't just working for the liberation of African American people. We were working for the liberation of everyone from a destructive, racist ideology. He said, we were working for everybody's liberation, including yours, and it's okay that you're doing this. That's why we did it. We have to continue to pray and understand that just like radiation drives out cancer, light and communication and allyship and community drives out anti-Semitism and every form of hate. And let us not forget that just like cancer that kills its host, so does hate. And so this is a life and death struggle between hate and life. And so we stand together tonight praying with our feet and believing that we are creating a community that's big enough for us all. Thank you.